We are back. Golenbock University. I'm Ralph Tyko from the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. The co-hosts are the Proffesor, Peter Golenbock, and the Maven, Alan Blumkin. How are you guys, gentlemen?
Hanging in there.
Very fine, thank you.
Good. Alan, you had a vacation. You got out of your apartment in the city. You went to your brother's.
Yeah.
Where's your brother live?
Great Neck.
Great Neck, okay. Out on the island a little bit.
Yeah.
Nice. Weather in New York, okay?
Oh, the rain that happened at Yankee Stadium didn't get to where we were.
Oh,
it got very cloudy a couple of times, but we escaped the rain there.
Don't have to ask Peter about the rain in St. Pete or the weather in St. Pete. It's always nice.
Yeah, it was beautiful all day.
Okay, that's the way it should be.
Retirement
is nice. I'm in Alameda, California. So basically we're talking 3 states through the modern technology that we enjoy and that sometimes drives us crazy in this world. So tonight I'd like to, with you guys' permission, talk about the wonderful book that Peter wrote about the New York Mets winning in 1986, and primarily the time you spent with the Mets was spent, as I see it, with Davey Johnson. He gave you an awful lot of gist for a book, did he not?
Well, I think you're confusing the two books. There's a book that I wrote called Amazin, which is an oral history of the entire history of the Mets from the beginning when they played. There was Metropolitans in the 1880s, and that goes all the way to 2002. And then there's a book that I did called Bats, because
with Davey Johnson.
That I did with Davey Johnson, where I spent the 1985 season with Davey, and that's a whole different experience. But the unfortunate thing about that, of course, was that the Mets came in second place in 1985. They lost to the Pirates by, I think, 2 games.
Cardinals.
Which is a shame.
Yeah.
Which is a real shame, because had they won the pennant in 1985, Bats would have been a much better known book.
A shame for, as a Met fan, for a number of reasons. Shame they didn't win five in a row, to be honest with you, with that team. What was the downfall of that potential dynasty as you see it?
The downfall of the Mets?
No, of the Mets in the potential dynasty that 85, 86. There were.
I mean, why did they stop?
One World Championship. It could have been. It could have been the deepest team of all time, and it was resulted in one championship.
I agree. Baseball is a funny game. I mean, you look at the Atlanta team with all of that great pitching that they had, and for so long, and all of the success they had. I don't think Atlanta won once.
They won one.
If I'm not,
they
won one. Okay.
Cleveland. They lost,
there you go. They won one.
Yeah,
with a team that should have won.
4. Yeah.
Yeah.
But they were winning pennants along the way too. They were dominating.
Well, somewhere along the line, a different general manager, a lack of success in signing players, and ownership. They were fighting for a while. The ownership was split between the 2 men. What's his name? He owned the
Doubleday. And
Wilpon. Yeah.
Yeah.
They reached the point where those 2 didn't get along, and Wilpon bought out the other. And then, to go a few years later, of course, Wilpon fell in with the great, the man who bilked people out of millions.
Bernie Madoff.
Yeah, Bernie Madoff.
Yeah.
And amazingly enough, I mean, the real miracle there is that Wilpon didn't lose the team. Madoff took him for many, many, many millions of dollars, along with, dozens of other, big-time Jewish charities and other, Jewish, millionaires and billionaires.
Right.
That's the amazing thing, with Wilpon is that
I think
lucky.
he was named to the Baseball Executive Finance Committee after that. Was Wilpon.
Yeah, well, Wilpon didn't do anything wrong except put his faith in somebody he shouldn't have. I mean, that's just loyalty to a friend who turns out to be one of the greatest thieves of all time. I mean, I can't really blame Wilpon for that.
No,
he was
not
smart
blaming
enough.
Wilpon, but Wilpon was the person they entrusted on that committee.
I know.
Yeah.
And Wilpon, after facing what he was facing, was smart enough to hire Sandy Alderson to be his general manager. And I happen to think Alderson's a marvelous general manager who's really saved the franchise.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you want to talk about the Amazin book, what was wonderful about that was that I had an opportunity to interview many of the players from the beginning of the franchise. People like Ron Hunt, people like Rod Keneal. I mean, they're just so thrilled that people, want to remember them. I mean, that's the joy of doing this. Keneal, which I hadn't realized, Keneal had been a Yankee prospect under Casey Stengel. He had gone to Casey Stengel's, rookie
instructional
camps,
which Casey developed in the first place.
Which Casey developed, and they tried to outlaw. Yeah. Well, it was Casey's genius to want to teach these young kids how to play the game right. I mean, one thing about Casey, and one reason the Yankees won so many pennants and World Championships in the 50s and the 60s is that Casey pushed fundamentals. He wanted his players to play fundamental baseball. And so when the Mets started in 1962, one of the players he put on the team was Rod Keneal. And he put him on the team not so much because he was talented, because obviously he was talented enough to be a major league ball player, but he wasn't talented enough to make a difference, but that Keneal knew his teaching philosophies. And so when spring training started in 1962, Casey had someone else who could help him teach. And Keneal explained to me how all that worked, and I just thought that was so interesting.
Yeah, it was. I think Whitey Herzog continued it down the line.
Yes, he did.
Angels. And Casey had a branch. All managers, they come from a branch. I guess Casey's was McGraw's.
No guessing about it. That's absolutely. He came from the John McGraw School of Managing. McGraw was one of the earliest people who platooned, and Casey was part of that platoon. A guy named Bill Cunningham was the left-handed hitter against righties, and Casey was the right-handed hitter against lefties. And Casey hated McGraw because he wanted to play every day. And so Casey, with the Yankees, for instance, he had Hank Bauer and Gene Woodling, and Bauer was the righty who he played against, for a while at any rate. He played against the left-handed pitchers, and he batted Woodling against the right-handed pitchers. And Woodling and Bauer both hated Casey for his doing that. But what Casey realized
they spent those World Series checks.
Not only that, but Casey's batting average was never higher, and neither was Cunningham's.
Right. Oh, okay.
because their talent more so, was hitting, the lefty batter hitting the righty pitcher and the righty batter hitting the lefty pitcher.
Right.
So I
thought
Casey's
basically Casey started the platoon system. Didn't realize he himself had been platooned.
Yeah.
So he knew that the hatred was just these guys wanted to play. That was the good hatred.
Oh, of course. Of course.
He wanted guys that wanted to get in. And I think if memory serves from your book, I think Woodling and you talked the other day, a lot of the stuff didn't get in with Woodling, but I think he came to begrudgingly accept that it was good for all concerned.
Well, both Woodling and Bauer, you can't say that they hated Stengel. They sort of hated the way Stengel was using them, but in a larger way, in a lifetime way, both of them loved the old man. Because they knew they were playing ball for somebody who was really special. That they were playing for somebody who
didn't love the old man, and that was the slew of Yankee infielders such as Jerry Lumpy, Bobby Richardson, Gil McDougall, maybe McDougall less so than the others. And there was a tremendously versatile player who was terrific. But Clete Boyer, he messed with their heads.
Well, Clete Boyer, I think in the World Series, if I'm not mistaken, pinch hit for him in the first inning.
Yeah, from one of the Pirates games.
One of the Pirates games. You're not going to engender any sort of love from your players when you do something like that. But understand something. If you're managing for 10 years and you win 8 pennants, there reaches a point in your head where you begin to believe that this is your team and that you can do pretty much anything you want with it. And if the players don't like it, they can go, you know what? And that's pretty much where Casey's head was at, especially in the last couple of years, 58, 59, and 60, when he was the manager of the Yankees. So he gets fired after they lose to the Pirates in 1960. And thank heaven for, New York fans are thrilled because George Weiss is named the general manager of the New York Mets, and Casey Stengel is named the manager of the New York Mets. The problem, though, was that Casey no longer is managing a championship ball club. Casey is managing one of the absolute worst ball clubs ever put together because the owners of the National League, in their own, brilliance, decided that they were not going to give the New York Mets and the Houston Colt 45s anybody who was decent. They were supposed to give up some people from their rosters, and the only people they ended up giving up were untested sort of minor leaguers and, big names who were, way past their prime. So
Al,
the Mets ended up.
Al, I think you know this. They changed the draft, the way they drafted.
The American League.
The American League in '61.
They had to freeze the rosters, and players like Dean Chance and the catcher Bob Rogers and some decent players were available. The National League owners saw this, and they said, basically who they made eligible were players who were never going to make their 40-man roster anyway, who they would either release or send back to the minors. And
now, what do you mean they closed the roster?
As Peter just said, it was minor leaguers who never were, and players very good players that were over the hill.
Oh, so they were able to have more players on their roster than the National League teams. But the National League teams were able to retain more of the players on their roster.
For example,
the National League teams.
Cincinnati won the National League pennant in 1961. The 3 players that they put up that the Mets took were Julio Chacon, Jay Hook, and Sherman Roadblock Jones.
Yeah.
All Hall of Famers.
Well, it gives you an idea.
That gives you an idea what was available out there.
What was available?
But, it's interesting, though, that players like Chacon and Felix Mantilla, who came in that draft from Milwaukee, they were very highly regarded. Mantilla played good ball with Milwaukee and good ball with Boston later on in his career, and was horrible with the Mets. Chacon ends up being the regular shortstop in more games than anyone else, and
well, the first regular shortstop was Al. Help me out here. What was his? Al Moran.
Yeah.
Al Moran.
No, that was in '63. Al Moran came over in '63.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay.
He couldn't hit
who was the shortstop? Who was the shortstop in '62?
It was supposed to be Mantilla. Mantilla ended up playing more games at third than anyone else, and Chacon ended up playing more games at short. Neal played more games at second, and
Charlie Neal was an ex-Brooklyn Dodger.
Yeah,
he had another ex-Brooklyn Dodger at third base, the very first third baseman for the New York Mets, Don Zimmer. Don Zimmer played through the middle of May.
And then they traded him. They traded him to Cincinnati for the immortal Cliff Cook.
Cliff Cook, who came with, not that there's anything wrong, Al, with having a bad back. But Cliff Cook, when you're a third baseman, and he literally came over and he couldn't bend down.
Like David Wright now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that hurt him. Hobie Landreth, who was, as Casey said, drafted because if he was the first draft choice, if you don't have a catcher, you're going to have a lot of pass balls.
Yeah.
So
but the greatest
they ended up having a lot of pass balls anyway.
Was Choo-Choo Coleman. That was the greatest catching acquisition they made that season.
Sure. Choo-Choo was unintelligible. You could not understand anything that Choo-Choo was saying. He was from the South, and he had a vernacular that just was literally unintelligible.
Choo-Choo was
not only that, of course, but he couldn't hit.
Yeah, Choo-Choo was so bad that he was sent down to the minors by the 1961 Phillies, who won 47 games. A terrible team that, because of the '62 Mets, is completely forgotten.
Oh, what a shame!
Yeah, that was the year the genius Gene Mark.
They lost 23 games in a row at one stretch.
No, that wasn't that year. That was it.
Yes, it was. 61.
Oh, the 64 was the year that the Phillies
they blew the
pen
in '64, but they were in 1961. They were 47 and 107, and they had a 23-game losing streak in July and August.
Wow! Can you imagine?
This team was terrible, and Choo-Choo Coleman couldn't stick with this team.
Right.
And again,
the
one
but you know
they
something?
acquired that I had hoped for, Sammy Taylor, was a pretty good hitting catcher with the Cubs a little bit, and he fizzled out. Canizero ended up catching most of the games, and it was a horrible season, but much less frustrating than the second season.
Well, when they traded Hobie Landreth to Baltimore, they wound up with the Marvelous Marv.
That's
Marvelous Marv Throneberry. Yes.
And
who turned out not to be able to either hit or catch.
No, it's rare to have that double skill.
The time the apparent triple, Casey Stengel went out to protest that he didn't miss second base, and the coach said, Casey don't waste the time and missed first base also.
That was the game
marvelous
played.
There was a
terrific
book
doubleheader. That was a doubleheader that I attended against the Cubs, and in one of the games, Lou Brock, then about 150 pounds, hits a home run into the center field bleachers, and in the other game, that famous triple took place, quote triple, because he did miss two bases, and That was a Met doubleheader. The first time I ever went to a game myself, couldn't get anybody up, and just got on the subway and bought some tickets and enjoyed myself. Those were the years of Kenny Hubbs with the Cubs.
Mm-hmm.
Kenny Hubbs.
Well, the great joy of going to see the Mets the first, I guess, 3 seasons was the ability to watch the games at the Polo Grounds. Now, I was a Yankee fan my whole life. I had never been to the Polo Grounds ever. And when I started going to see the Mets at the Polo Grounds, I was amazed at what a fabulous, fabulous ballpark that was. Yeah, I just love the place. It had such amazing history, and the fact that this ballpark doesn't exist anymore is a crime.
You know, the fact that cities don't get domain names of their sports teams is a crime. That the Baltimore Colts can move in the middle of the night and take the name with them. That the Giants and Dodgers can move to the West Coast, take the names with them. And I'll tell you, any team that moves, the older I get, the more I realize how damaged I was. And, you know, you can say, well, your team moves away when you're a little kid and all that stuff. Well, you know, if you're a fanatic about something and you really love it and all of a sudden your team is gone and you're 11 years old, it's going to damage you. How many, I'm not the only one, how many kids not just that move, all over the country, Boston Braves moving, and then
Boston Braves, the Browns and the Philly A's were second fiddle by a large margin when they moved out. They didn't leave the cities barren. The Browns were losers. The Braves got 280,000 people last season in Boston. The A's got 306,000 last year in Philadelphia.
How many of those were kids, though, that it wasn't their fault, that either the stadium situation was terrible or that the teams sucked themselves? But how many kids are affected by it? Say what you want. The bottom line is, if you want to develop future fans and if you want to keep these games alive, not just baseball, sports, you really have to be more loyal to the cities. And just over a lifetime, I've seen.
I was a big Yankee fan those years. I didn't want to see the Dodgers move because when the Yankees would beat them in the World Series, it wouldn't mean as much.
That's true.
That's right.
That's true. Yeah. And but you know, when you're thinking, Al, you never really think Dodgers and Giants moving. You realize we all missed Willie in his first prime. It was terrible. Not really his first. He really started coming into his own as players would do in their late 20s, and I was lucky enough in '65 to move. Lucky enough, the Air Force moved me out here in '66 actually, and I got to see him a lot at Candlestick. Even though the Giants weren't as competitive as the Dodgers, they still managed to win 2 pennants in the early 50s and 1 world championship. They were missed as well. And you're not the only one who thinks of them as a second thought, almost as a team that moved. The Dodgers move, but the Giants were moved before. They were going to go to Minneapolis.
Exactly, yeah.
And the only thing that got them to California was they went out with O'Malley.
O'Malley convinced all of them, yeah.
It made sense from, I think Branch Rickey forced the issue with the Continental League. It made sense from an expansion standpoint. The West Coast was ready. It didn't have to be the Giants and Dodgers.
When the Angels were formed, they were the only Far West team in the American League until the A's moved out to Oakland.
Yeah, so they were able to. The league was able to have a league and make that one long road trip for.
Yeah, well, they make the road trip out to L.A. to play the Angels, and there was nowhere else to go on the coast. Now they have Oakland, Seattle, and National League has Phoenix and Denver, San Diego.
Right. Peter, you mentioned once that there was only one team, the Yankees, that really, when you went to write the book, they gave you carte blanche, so to speak. I was surprised that you didn't get that from the Dodgers with Bums, given how insightful
the
book
Dodgers
was.
didn't exist. The Dodgers didn't exist anymore. What are you talking about? The Brooklyn Dodgers.
But there was the LA Dodgers, and Bums was part of that book.
It's interesting. I had a book, and I'm going to turn around and find the damn thing because it's here behind me. A fella by the name of Jack Smalling. He had a book called the Baseball Autograph Collector's Handbook. He's had it for years. And for those people who love baseball autographs, this book has the addresses of all of the living baseball players. And this is where I was able to find the baseball players of most of the team books that I wrote about. To go to Jack Smalling's book. And the reason for that, the reason Major Leagues cooperated with Jack Smalling is because the Major Leagues needed to send checks to the retired ball players, but they needed to know where to send them. So Smalling and Major League Baseball, each in themselves, tracked down where the ball players moved to.
Right.
So that they had this book of, where all these ball players lived. And he would update this book every year. And it was the book that got me the addresses. And once I got the addresses, at least back then, for the most part, if you had the addresses, you could go to, 411 and you could get the telephone numbers. As the years went by, as baseball players started making millions and millions of dollars, and then they had agents and that sort of thing, it became harder and harder to do these books. But at the beginning, when I started, thanks to Jack Smalling, I had the ability to contact almost anybody I wanted to contact. That's why I didn't really need the teams, and I knew they weren't going to help me anyway. When I was doing my Mets book, I called the PR director of the Mets. He had been there for years.
Horowitz, he's still there. Jay Horowitz.
Is he still there?
Yeah, he's still there.
Yeah, Horowitz.
Yeah.
And Horowitz basically gave me the cold shoulder and told me to drop dead.
Really?
But that's how most of these PR guys are. I mean, I don't have any sort of I don't have credentials from the Tampa Bay Rays, even though I live in St. Petersburg.
Really?
Because I'm not a beat writer. I don't work for a newspaper. And as far as the PR guys are concerned, if you don't work for a newspaper, not only are they not going to help you, but they look at you with a jaundiced eye and wonder what you're up to. So they're no help at all.
Well, now, I can't imagine Dynasty not having been a boom to Yankee fandom. How the Yankees could not have benefited in so many ways from having your book out there. And
but they were the people who helped me. Those were the people who helped me.
Right.
They're the ones who helped. Yeah.
But other teams seeing that, like Jay Horowitz seeing, you went to the Mets after Dynasty, and Jay Horowitz seeing the results thereof couldn't look ahead and say, well, this is, Peter Golenbock. I mean, look what a job he's done. Dynasty, but Bums, it would be an honor. I'm a fanatical.
Ralph, I should have called you and had you call Jay Horowitz on my behalf.
To be honest with you, there's an independent bookstore. It's called Books Inc. And they're a chain of 9 bookstores in in Northern California. One of them is in Alameda.
Mm-hmm.
I think it would be a great idea if you brought 20 of each of your books out here and set up with Books Incorporated. And because I know, like in the old days, you told me Barnes & Noble would stack hundreds of them. They don't do that anymore. You bring 20 of Dynasty, you bring 20 of the new Dover Press Dynasty, some Bums, some Forever Boys, and
Ralph, you think I've got piles of these books in my house? I don't.
We'll make a deal with the publishers. We'll get the books and.
Well, I'll tell you what. The next time I come out your way. Okay. Next time I'm out your way, I'll call you up. You arrange it, and I'll come sign the books. How's that?
All right. Well, why don't I arrange it, and you come out, and you have a place to stay, and I'll arrange it, and it'll give you a reason to come out.
There you go. Okay.
All right. That'll be next.
Okay.
See how the world works, folks. Right before your eyes, we're making business deals. But it's an amazing thing. It's an amazing thing.
So anyhow, talking about the Mets and how they started out. The Mets were smart enough to get as many former Brooklyn Dodgers and New York Giants players as they could. So Gil Hodges was playing for them.
The only Giant player besides Willie Mays who ever played for the Mets was Ed Pursuit.
Ah, you're right.
There's all
right. And Johnny Antonelli was he was drafted.
Never played with them.
He didn't, but I think he was drafted.
He ever played a game with them.
As did Billy Lowe's.
Yeah, well, Billy Lowe's was retired, not Billy, a long time before that.
But okay. So you had Brooklyn Dodgers, you had Gil Hodges, you had Duke Snider,
right?
And you had
3 actually.
Yeah.
Charlie Neal.
Charlie Neal.
You had Joe Myron Ginsburg and
Joe Ginsburg. Yes. There you go.
They both played.
Ginsburg never played for the Dodgers. They just Detroit and Cleveland.
I thought Joe Ginsburg was with the Dodgers.
No, he was with Detroit and Cleveland.
At any rate, the attempt to have people like Willie Mays and Duke Snider play for the Mets was obviously to draw the old New York Giants and Dodger fans. And they had a certain amount of success doing that, even though the team was terrible. And it wasn't until 1969 they had people like Tom Seaver and Jerry Koosman. They had a pitcher by the name of Nolan Ryan, who I went to see play as often as I possibly could. I just thought he was going to be the greatest pitcher who ever lived. And he was just sensational. And somehow, in 1969, they ended up winning the pennant and winning the World Series under Gil Hodges. I mean, you talk about miracles. I mean, that was a miracle.
That was indeed. And I'll tell you, you mentioned the pitchers. Jerry Grody was about their first really, really good catcher. And that helped them immensely. I remember the words of Johnny Bench saying that if Jerry Grody played with Cincinnati, Bench would play third base. That's how good an arm that Grody had.
Well, Grody was an interesting character because he was a real curmudgeon. And if he wasn't happy with what the pitchers were doing, he would throw the ball back at them at their nuts as fast as he possibly could and make them jump a step as if to say, hey, shape up and cut the crap and let's get going. I mean, Grody was a very interesting motivator in the way he got the pitchers to even greater results than otherwise they might have. So yes, you're absolutely right. He was very important. And of course, Tom Seaver, he became a god. I mean, terrific.
Oh yeah.
Tom Seaver was just, before Dwight Gooden came along years later, Tom Seaver was the guy.
Talk about the pressure that Zachary, whom he was traded for, was Tom Seaver. to Cincinnati,
Sure.
amongst others, Ducky Flynn.
Sure.
You got to know Zachary in writing the book.
Pat Zachary was a St. Petersburg Pelican in the senior league. And I got to know him because that Pelican team ended up winning the championship in the first senior league competition. And I got to interview him for that book called The Forever Boys. And he was traded for Seaver, and he just found the pressure of having to fill Tom Seaver's shoes just to be crushing. You know, when you pitch, you have to have a good head on your shoulders, and you have to be sort of worry-free. And that was not Pat when he was with the Mets. He just found it so incredibly difficult because he was the young phenom who was supposed to take the place of Tom Seaver, and quite frankly, nobody was going to take the place of Tom Seaver after Seaver was traded away.
Right. Could that have been avoided, Alan? Do you think that trade? What was Dick Young's part in it?
It was Dick Young. Dick Young became a shill for the Met ownership. By that time, Mrs. Payson had passed away, and the daughter took over, and she didn't know anything. So she gave the power to M. Donald Grant, who was one of the biggest jackasses ever to run a baseball team. And this is when free agency first started, and Seaver wanted a certain figure, and Dick Young, Dick Young wrote against it, giving him a bigger contract the contract they wanted, and in the process insulted Nancy Seaver.
That's right. That's exactly what happened. And Tom said, the heck with this.
Yeah.
I'm leaving.
In fact, what's ironic is me and a bunch of friends of mine were up at Yankee Stadium on August 4th, 1985, when he won his 300th game pitching for the White Sox.
Right.
That was a great thrill because it was a one-shot opportunity.
Yep.
And he pitched a complete game, and he beat the Yankees, I think it was 4-1.
Mm-hmm.
And they got him back in 1983, and then they put him up in the compensation draft. That was in effect at that point. And then they did when he was taken, and the White Sox took him, and Cashin and was coming out. We made a mistake. That was nonsense. They didn't want to have to manage a superstar who they thought was on the way down.
That's true.
Right.
Yeah.
It was when that whole thing went through. It was absolute utter nonsense. The way they
it is true though that Seaver was trying to renegotiate a contract that he already signed. So, and in those days that was kind of a taboo. And I think that's what
this is after the first class of free agents. 1977 was the year that he was traded. This is after the first class of free agents went through after 1976. You saw what players of less ability were getting.
Oh,
exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
I mean, they should have jumped up and signed him whether he was eligible for free agency or not.
Of course.
Obviously.
And then to jump ahead just for a second, they ended up winning in 1986. That's with Doc Gooden and Darryl Strawberry, two utterly fascinating people. Doc, who lived in St. Petersburg, where I live,
right.
His kids went to school with my son. Was just the loveliest, most terrific person. And I was able to watch firsthand as his life, just sank into a world of drugs where he lost his family, he lost his home, he lost any money that he had. It was just awful to watch that. Strawberry had his own problems with drugs, and alcohol, Strawberry ended up with the Yankees, where he didn't do too badly. Steinbrenner was one of these fellows who, in that he caused more people to be drug addicts and alcoholics than anybody else I knew, but also he liked to save them as well, and so he was one of those people. Darryl was one of those people George hopefully saved by putting him on.
Darryl made some not nice remarks about Dwight's recovery and this, that, and the other thing. And I think, considering the source, he should have shut the hell up. But
he probably should have. But
he's become a preacher, Darryl.
That doesn't surprise me. I mean, Dwight. I hope Dwight's okay. I really do.
I used to run home in 1985 to watch him on TV because he was so incredible that season.
I have the tapes. I still have VHS tapes of the games that he pitched because it was so. I was sure that he was the next, Hall of Fame pitcher. He should have been.
You weren't the only one. Everybody did.
It was so exciting to watch him pitch. It was just, spectacular. And that first year when he came up, Davey had to fight Cashin to bring him up to the Mets. Davey said, "If you don't bring him up, I quit." And Cashin gave in, and he brought him up, and he was just sensational.
You know, if this is true after 1985, that the management was concerned about his pitch counts, and he was, throwing getting too many strikeouts, and they wanted him to change his pitching tactics to throw more breaking balls and to lower his pitch count. And that's why in 1986, he was not nearly as good as he was in 1985.
It's hard to imagine. I mean, I hadn't heard anything like that at all. I mean, this is the sort of nonsense that you're listening, right now. We've got a team. We've got a team here in St. Petersburg, in Tampa Bay, the Rays, where for a long time, when the pitcher hit 100 pitches, the manager would come out and yank him and put some other guy in. This year, our bullpen is sort of, got holes in it. So they're letting the guys go longer, 110 pitches, 115 pitches, 120 pitches, which to me is like the old days.
Yeah.
Let the guy pitch, for crying out loud. Leave him alone. And it's
builds up
sort
the
of
arm
interesting.
strength the more you pitch.
That's what you would think, but they've got sabermetrics now, which show that the pitchers have the batting average against the pitchers are lowest the first time through the order, and then the second time through the order the batting average is somewhat higher, and then the third time through the order it's quite a bit higher. And so what the Rays started doing a few years ago was, after the pitchers went through the batting order twice, they'd yank them. I mean, it was just bizarre. And they,
no matter how well they were doing.
It didn't matter how well they were doing. The sabermetrics said you pitch to the guys for the third time, they're going to hit you. And I'm thinking of all those games I used to watch where guys pitch perfect, complete games. It's like, what kind of nonsense is this?
But there have been 7 complete games already this season so far. I'm keeping track.
All right.
And
all right.
7 in the entire
pitcher at 7
league.
innings. He pulled him after the 7th inning. Instead of letting him go out and then he gives up a hit, then you pull him. But the best out of 5.
We're just saying Seaver pitched a complete game in his 300th win. So I estimate he must have been in his late.
He was 40.
40 already.
Yeah,
with the complete game.
Yeah.
And there's 7 in the entire major leagues. It reminds me of how Babe Ruth hit more home runs than an entire league.
Yeah, most teams. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me interject while I'm thinking of it. You went forward a little bit. Let me go back a little bit, and I'm going to run this into how Casey's Instructional League produced, amongst many others, a fellow by the name of Whitey Herzog, who was instrumental as a scout, a player development guy, a coach through a major league coach at one time or another with those Mets while they were building. And he was as much responsible George Weiss, Casey, and him were very responsible for what came out in 1969, because all the players developed, all these young guys, Harrelson and what have you, they all went to Casey's developed instructional league that Whitey Herzog, who was a student, a direct student, was running throughout the 60s. And he doesn't get much credit for building that team, but he was right there, Whitey Herzog.
Well, there's an argument to be made. The argument to be made was one of the worst things that they allowed happen was letting Whitey Herzog leave the organization. You know, he went to manage. Whitey Herzog went off to manage, and he was a tremendous, tremendous manager. The Mets let him go.
Yeah, I wonder if he was in consideration when they named Yogi after Gil passed away. And they quickly named Yogi. I remember they announced it at Gil's funeral. It was like a little impromptu press conference that showed less class than anything I'd seen till that point. It's a changing world. But the Mets announced that Yogi was going to take over at Gil.
Well, there was a player strike going on at that point. And they wanted to name somebody as quickly as they could.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if Herzog was.
I doubt it. I thought Yogi. From all I've read about, I just finished the Alan Barra biography on Yogi, and he said Yogi basically was the only candidate there. They wanted to name one right away to preserve the continuity, so have everything in place by the time the player strike ended about 2 weeks later.
And he did a perfectly fine job, and was
absolutely.
the manager.
He won in '73, and boy, you talk about New York press. I can remember the Mets started horribly slow that year, and press was all over Cashin. They were all over Yogi. I remember the
Cashin wasn't afraid of.
Oh,
yeah, no, it was the next person.
Oh, okay. I can't think of who it was, but anyway, they wanted those guys fired, and they prevailed. They won.
They won. They were 82 and 79. They played a very, very weak division that year. I was at all the LCS games with the Reds that they played in Shea Stadium, including the Harrelson Rose thing. And
that Barra book was terrific, the way he described Yogi, and Yogi didn't just take those firings lightly. He was an intense guy, and he was portrayed that way in Barra's book.
The Reds in 1973, Concepcion was out. He was injured, missed the whole postseason, and after he got past Rose, Morgan, Benson, Perez, there's nobody. They didn't have Griffey, or they didn't have Foster, they didn't have any of those types playing at that point. So
but they did have Bobby Tolan, who was instrumental.
Tolan was gone. Tolan was injured.
Okay.
71, he was injured. A big year.
Tolan was a big part of your book, The Forever Boys, Peter.
Without a doubt. Yeah, he was our manager.
Yeah.
And
I finally read that a couple of months ago. It was fantastic.
Wasn't it? Was not that book?
Pierre, I think that was
I love that
book.
Yeah, that's the book that when I called you originally, Peter, and asked you if you'd be on my little podcast when I was first starting, that's the book I wanted to talk about, and that impressed you that, that I wasn't calling it. I mean, what could we talk about with Dynasty and bums and what have you? But that book was, wow. I don't know. Was that a bestseller, Peter? Was that one of your 8
It was not a bestseller because what happened was the league lasted 1 year and a half. So at the time the book came out, the league no longer existed. And so naturally, the sort of nonsense kind of review you get is, who wants to read a book about a league that no longer exists? I mean, that's the sort of nonsense
that is absolutely nonsense.
And it was very difficult to combat that sort of thing because I can write them, but promoting them is not an easy thing to do.
No, for anybody. But you said it. I can write them. And that was incredibly well written.
Well, the beauty of that, not to get off the subject of the Mets, but the beauty of that was that they allowed me to be part of the team. I rode the buses with them from town to town. I sat in the clubhouse with them. I was the color announcer for their ball games. And we just had a tremendous relationship. You know, Pat Zachary and Bobby Tolan and Lenny Randall, and it just goes on and on and on. These are wonderful people who love the game of baseball, as I did. And I told them at the beginning that what I wanted to do more than anything else is explain, you know, their careers and what happened to them and why they're, you know, back playing again the game that they loved. And so they gave me, 107% cooperation, and the quality, you know, of a book when you're interviewing other people is in the interviews, and they were marvelous, and so the book came out very well.
Well, okay, what have we learned today? I'm in incredible shock that the Tampa Bay team does not take advantage of having Peter Golenbock in their midst in any way. I mean, they could have you writing yearbooks, writing history.
Well, let me interrupt you. The first 5 years of their existence, they had me writing stories for their programs and their yearbooks. And then Vince Namoli decided that he could save the $500 by getting interns to do it for free. So that's what happened with that.
Oh, okay. All right. Wow. Holy shit. Does that tell you something?
Yep.
Does that absolutely tell you something? See, I'm thinking, in my head, I'm thinking, you come in, you go to your seat behind the dugout, that they love to have you. The players wave. There's Peter Golenbock. There's this.
No.
That's exactly how. So DePola's a dope. That's basically.
Well, he's the old owner. He's not there anymore.
Okay.
That was the first thing.
That's a $500 savings worth saving. I'll tell you.
There you go.
I was in the
listen,
5-level.
Don't get the wrong impression. I am not unhappy. We have season tickets. Wendy and I sit up in the 300 level in the second row. You know, we've got best seats in the house. We love going to the games. It's fine. Believe me, it is.
I know it's fine, but you would think that it's like in your own backyard you have a gem. You would think they'd be smart enough to use it.
I can't. I'm no use to them, and so you know, what use am I to them? And so the answer is no.
Okay.
That's
the deal. So interns are used to put it together for me.
Yeah. Well, the interns will write them. Interns will write them. Articles.
Adequately.
Sure.
Perhaps.
Absolutely.
You can use that expression. But as you say, I can write them. Okay, Peter, I think you can. And,
all right, have a great week.
Alan, I don't want to cut you short as usual. Anything that you want to ask Peter about the Mets? Anything you want to add to it?
No, he's covered it all. Well, I just want to mention that in 1986, I was at the wildest game they played all year. I was in Cincinnati. On July 22nd, 1986, that was the 14-inning game where they alternated Orozco and McDowell.
Oh, yeah.
And what happened was that Dave Parker made an error in the top of the ninth and allowed the Mets to tie the game. In the bottom of the ninth, Eric Davis slid into Ray Knight, and they had a fist fight. And both of them were thrown out. So Davy Johnson sent Gary Carter in to play third base for the first time since he was a rookie with the Expos. And they brought in Roscoe and McDowell based on who was hitting. They put the other one in right field. And because Strawberry had been run for, earlier in the game. And Pete Rose, every time they changed, would go crazy because the umpires were allowing them warm-up pitches. And Roscoe actually caught a fly ball in the 12th, 13th inning in right field. Gary Carter started a double play at third base, and then in the top of the 14th, Howard Johnson had a 3-run home run off Ted Power, and that's why the game 6-3. It was an unbelievable ball game.
Gary played third? I thought you said
in
first.
In that game, yeah, after Ray Knight was tossed.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Very interesting on that. And you reminded me, too, that Parker was with Cincinnati.
Yeah, after they left the Pirates, yeah.
Yeah. There was another guy who was incredible.
Got the Hall of Fame career up his nose with cocaine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's just for another show, gentlemen. Thank you very much, both of you. And same time, same bat channel?
Same bat time.
Did I get it right?
That's from the old Batman show that was on TV in the 60s. The old campy Batman show.
I remember it well.
Okay.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. See you next week. And for those of you out there, keep on keeping on, and be safe out there. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.